Hello, everyone. My name is Sandra Postel, and I am absolutely thrilled to be part of this National Biodiversity Teach-In for 2016. And I really want to thank all of you for joining me today to talk about my favorite topic. Before we get going, I just want to make sure everyone can hear me. So if you can't, just send a note and we'll make sure we fix that, okay? I'm going to assume, unless I hear from you, that everyone can hear me okay. Let's see, and I also want to thank Elgin High School for organizing this teach-in. It's a fabulous opportunity for me to get to talk to all of you, and I really appreciate all the effort that went into making these webinars possible. So thank you very much to Elgin High School. So we're going to talk about freshwater today, and of course it's my favorite topic. I think it might be best if I start talking and give us the background, and as you think about questions, feel free to send them in. But I think it might be best for everyone if we save the questions to the end, okay? And I'll reserve time so that we can get to as many questions as possible, okay? So here we are. We are very, very lucky to live on a very water-rich planet. The astronauts sent us this fabulous photo from space that shows we live on a very blue planet, but only about 2.5% of all that water on Earth is freshwater. And of that freshwater, 2/3 of it is locked up in ice and glaciers. So less than 1% of all the water on the planet is actually fresh and somewhat accessible to us to use for drinking and growing our food and making all of our industrial products and everything. So it's a very tiny share. And the important thing to remember is that 1% of all the water on the planet that's fresh is finite. Okay? It comes down as rain and snow. And so we almost think of it as being this always there kind of resource. But in fact, it's finite. But as we all know, right, our population and our economies are not finite. They're growing. And so we have this finite water supply, but these demands for water that over time have kept growing. Now, here's an interesting thing. Everything that you see in the room where you are, everything that we use every day, everything that we eat and buy and wear, takes water to make, okay? And sometimes a lot of water. So think about a simple cotton t-shirt. In your mind, take a guess at how much water it takes to make a simple cotton t-shirt. I'm sure many of us have cotton shirts on today. I do. I'm sure many of you do. Think about how many gallons you think it takes to make a cotton shirt. And I'm going to show you the answer right about now. About 700 gallons. I don't know how many of you guessed anywhere close to that, but I was totally stunned when I first learned how many gallons it takes to make a cotton shirt. The reason it takes so many gallons is mainly because it takes a lot of water to grow crops out in the field. So most of those gallons are growing the cotton out in the farmer's field, okay? Let's take another example of a popular food for many people, a hamburger. Take a guess. I'm going to show you the answer, and it's not going to include the pickle and lettuce and fries, okay? Just the burger. Here we go. An average burger, a typical burger. Now again, there's variations on burgers, grass-fed and so on, that are better, but the typical burger, about 600 gallons, okay, to grow the corn that's fed to the cow or what have you. So it's a lot of water. And this is not about making us feel guilty, right? It takes a lot of water to sustain our lifestyles. It's just an awareness, right? Those 600 gallons in one burger is about as much water as you would use at home in a whole week, okay, in one burger. So our diets are very important to understand our water footprint on the planet, okay? So now think about all the things we use and wear and buy and eat every day, and then we have to multiply that by the billions of people on the planet with us, right? We have more than 7 billion people on the planet. So that's a lot of water, right, to sustain our lifestyles. And again, not about feeling guilty about this, just about an awareness of how much water it takes. And so as we've seen populations grow over time, as our demands have grown, what we see is that it's taking a toll on the natural environment, okay, on our rivers and on our lakes and on our aquifers, okay? And if we look around the world, I'm going to show you a map right now that shows in the red zones around the world where we're seeing our demands for water bump up against the limits of nature's supply of water. So all of these red zones, much of the western United States, even parts of Florida and the mid-Atlantic states in the United States, you can see so much of Asia, China, India, North Africa. A good bit of the world now is in what we call this position of water stress, where it's tough to meet all of the demands for water because of that finite water supply in those watersheds, okay? And so what we're beginning to see in many parts of the world are things like rivers running dry. Here's the Rio Grande. This is not far at all from where I live. In fact, I took this picture a few years ago. And this is not the end of the river. This is the middle of the river. But the water was diverted to grow crops in the Rio Grande Valley. Here's a shot of another river in Australia. Some of you may have heard about what we call the Millennium Drought in Australia, which lasted more than 10 years. And this was a very important river in Australia that was running dry for a long period of time during that drought, the Murray River. Here's the Colorado. I think some of you are watching from states that are in the Colorado River Basin. This is the lower end of the Colorado, and the Colorado has been running dry most years for the last half century. And that's because our demands for water in the West have been growing so much. And many of us, even if we don't live in the Colorado River Basin, we actually eat some of the Colorado River because water that's from that river grows our lettuce in much of the wintertime. So no matter where we are in the country, we're probably eating a little bit of the Colorado River in the course of the year. So these rivers are really taking a hit, right, from our finite supply and our demands for water. Also our lakes. This lake had a very big impact on me in my career. 20 years ago, was it 20 years ago? Yeah, 20 years ago, I went to the Aral Sea, and many of you probably don't know about this sea. It's in Central Asia. It used to be part of the Soviet Union, and it's now in the Central Asian countries. You can see from this photograph, these two photographs, on the left, this was a satellite picture taken in 1964. This used to be the fourth largest lake in the world. And look now, 2014, most of it is gone. Most of it is dried up. So in our lifetime, we might see this whole lake, except for those little bits of the lake in the northern part you can see. Most of it may be gone in our lifetime. And this was once the fourth largest lake in the world. And again, it's taking water out of the rivers that used to flow into the lake to sustain it, growing cotton out in the field. And so the lake no longer got the water that it needed from those rivers to stay healthy and stay full. And it's been evaporating in the desert for the last half century. So some important examples. And one last one that's really, actually two last ones. Many of us live near wetlands, and we enjoy the birds that are in those wetlands. Well, half of the world's wetlands now, up to half, have disappeared. Again, that's from the way we manage the land, the way we use the water. And so all of the birds and fish and wildlife, right, that have depended on those wetlands have lost their habitats. We're celebrating and focusing on biodiversity in these webinars, and water is such an important element to sustaining life on the planet, right? Water is life. So as we lose these habitats, we're losing the opportunity to sustain that incredible diversity of life on the planet. This is one of my colleagues, Zeb Hogan. He works on big fish, mega fish in the world. And an important point I'd like to make in terms of the impacts of this water stress and using rivers and lakes the way we have is that we've been losing species. Freshwater species are very much at risk of going extinct. Many of them already have. And we're talking not just about fish, big fish, but also, amphibians and, frogs and salamanders, aquatic insects, which are so important to the food web, in keeping, the whole web of life sort of going. Mussels, which help cleanse our water. 2/3 of the mussel species in the United States are at risk of extinction. So it's very important to think about water and its fundamental role as the basis of life on the planet, and how our use of rivers and lakes has really kind of diminished that diversity and sort of put at risk that whole web of life that keeps everything humming on the planet. When we go on vacation, where do we go? We go to rivers, we go to lakes, we go to the ocean, estuaries. We like to fish, we like to swim, and we want healthy ecosystems. Well, so do the other species we share the planet with. This is a paddlefish, a Mississippi paddlefish, which isn't on the brink of extinction, but it certainly is. It certainly is what's called vulnerable, right? It is a vulnerable species, and its existence will depend on how we manage, in this case, the Mississippi River Basin. This is in the Missouri River. Zeb has just gotten this paddlefish to tag it so that we can monitor where it goes and how it moves up and down the Missouri, which ends up flowing into the Mississippi. And so he's been very instrumental in trying to understand what's happening to the mega fish, the big fish on the planet. And then one last example about how we got into this situation in the first place, right? If you think about when and where water comes, it's not always distributed evenly across the planet in time or in space, right? Many places get most of their water in 3 months of the year. Some places get very little water to begin with, right? The desert regions, Los Angeles, Las Vegas, Phoenix. And so building dams has been a way to capture water during the wet time of the year, store it in a reservoir, and then distribute that water to farmers, to cities, during the drier parts of the year. And it's also helped to generate electricity. So all of those purposes, hydropower, irrigation, water supply, flood control, helping to manage floods, and recreation. We enjoy going to some of these reservoirs to do boating and swimming and so on. So they're very important purposes, right? We've built these dams for important reasons, but they've had a big impact on the health of our river systems around the world. In 1950, we had 5,000 large dams. Today, about 50,000 large dams. So that's a really big change in the aquatic environment in a very short period of time, geologically and biologically, for the species that have adapted to living in those rivers. I'm sure many of you know this photo. This is Hoover Dam on the Colorado River. This was the biggest, I should say the first big super dam that was built in the world. And it really unleashed a whole era of big dam construction around the world. Hoover Dam was completed in about 1935, and it really allowed the West to develop and grow. Without water stored in these reservoirs, it was very hard to grow crops during the dry season, to support cities that were growing because they needed water throughout the year. So these have been very important, but also, as you can see, a big block, literally a block in a flowing river that's had a big impact on all the life that lives in that river. Also diversions, right? If you're Los Angeles and don't have enough rain, well, you've got to get your water from someplace. And here the California Aqueduct brings water hundreds of miles from Northern California down to Southern California so that Los Angeles could get enough water to grow. And we've seen this all over the world, where cities that are in dry places build canals and bring water in from hundreds of miles away sometimes. And that's, again, right, had a big impact on the health of our rivers. Last example to think about is what's happening literally out of sight, out of mind, groundwater. Much of the world, including much of the United States, depends on groundwater. water that's in what we call aquifers, geologic formations under the earth that can store water. Just like a reservoir stores water above ground, aquifers store water below ground. And we rely more and more on these aquifers for our water supply, but we've been depleting them, pulling more water out of them than nature is putting back in. And so in a sense, you can think of it as using tomorrow's water to meet our demands today. Well, what's going to happen when those aquifers are reduced, are depleted for the next generation or two, right? So this is a real serious problem. We've been getting a better fix on it from satellite data that's able to literally evaluate what's happening under the ground. So we have to start paying attention to groundwater, okay? So given all this, this is what I work on every day. Given these realities of our water world, what are we going to do about this? How do we begin to figure out how to live more in harmony with the water cycle, how to live more sustainably with regard to water? And most of what we've been talking about is sort of bad news. It's a downer. But I really believe we have so many opportunities and untapped solutions to solve these problems that I'm very optimistic we can actually find a way to live in much better balance and have healthy rivers and healthy economies side by side in most of the world. And so I want to talk a little bit more about that. If you think about what we've just been talking about for the last, 15 minutes, think about the two things you think we need to do as a global society to accomplish that, to live in better balance with our rivers and lakes and our freshwater ecosystems. What do you think we need to do? I think it's two things. One is to figure out how we can shrink our human water footprint. How we can live healthy, happy, productive lives, right? You and I, but have a lower water footprint, less impact. Everyone, less impact on the earth, particularly those of us that are blessed to live in wealthy countries where we have a lot of opportunity to buy a lot of things and eat whatever we want, right? Our footprint tends to be a lot bigger than poor people in other countries, right? And so what can we do to shrink that footprint? The second thing I think we need to do is return some water to nature. So these are, I think, the two very big things that are important to do. How can we do that? One is to conserve and use water more wisely. If we think about where our water is used, 70 or 80% of it is used in agriculture to grow crops. As I mentioned, crops are very thirsty. It takes a lot of water to grow our food, to make our cotton, and so on. But there's a lot we can do to grow those crops more efficiently. And farmers are beginning to do this, but we have a long way to go. We can get, in a sense, more crop per drop if we have better irrigation systems, irrigate crops only when they need water, and be very efficient in how we deliver that water to crops. So we can do this. Same thing in industry. We can recycle and reuse more water. And in our homes, do we need to have everywhere such green, green, green lawns that take a lot of water in the summertime? Can we have a beautiful landscape without all of that water going to green lawns, particularly if you're in the Western US, where having a green lawn takes an awful lot of water? So a lot of things we can do in each of these sectors, okay, to use water more wisely in all of these different areas. And then, as I said, returning water to nature. How can we make that happen? This is the same shot, the Rio Grande, with water and without water. And you can see, right, just the life that you can imagine being in that river on the right-hand side and the lack of life that must be in the river when it doesn't have water. So how can we begin to return water to nature and make sure that we have a healthy balance in our water use versus nature's water use? This is what I've been working on pretty much my whole professional life, is how to make this happen, how to bring this about. And about 4 years ago, when I was working with National Geographic as their Freshwater Fellow, in partnership with a couple other great organizations, the Bonneville Environmental Foundation in Portland, Oregon, and Participant Media in Los Angeles, National Geographic, the three of us got together and designed an initiative called Change the Course. And I'd like to spend a little bit of time telling you about what this initiative is about, because it's a direct response to these challenges, and it's an attempt to really expand and grow a movement, if you will, of freshwater stewardship that engages everyone who wants to be a part of it, whether you're an ordinary citizen living anywhere in the country, hopefully eventually the world, whether you're a business, whether you're a conservation organization, a government, everyone can be a part of this. And it's really trying to do exactly those two things: shrink our human water footprint and return water to the natural environment. So we're bringing the public together with companies, together with conservation organizations to do exactly that. And we've been piloting Change the Course in the Colorado River Basin for the last 3 years, but we're now ready to start moving it out. We've had great success, and I'm going to show you some examples in a minute. We've had great success with our work in the Colorado River Basin, and we're now starting to think about moving into other states and other places in North America, and hopefully eventually the world, to really grow this movement of water stewardship. So what this is about is we invite anyone in the public to make a pledge to conserve water. Make a pledge to do something in your daily life that you can imagine carrying through on that would shrink your personal water footprint. Could be something about your diet, could be something about how you use energy. It takes 13 gallons of water to make 1 gallon of gasoline. Using our energy always takes water, so reducing our energy use also conserves water. Thinking about how much stuff we buy, right? Everything less that we buy saves water. If we buy recycled, it saves water. So all those things, as well as the use of water at home. So think about a way that you could conserve water. Make a pledge. It's totally free, right? Make a pledge to do something in your life. If we all do that, we can begin to imagine our human water footprint as a whole beginning to shrink. So we promise, for every pledge that's made, we will return 1,000 gallons to a depleted river or lake or wetland. For every pledge, 1,000 gallons goes back to the environment. And what makes that happen are our corporate partners and sponsors that underwrite those pledges. So they contribute funds to change the course that allow us to develop restoration projects on the ground with conservation groups that are working on the ground and return water to the natural environment. So pledge, fund, restore, and that's the model. And it's working really, really well. So I'm going to show you some examples. As I mentioned, we've been piloting Change the Course in the Colorado River Basin. And this is a map of the watershed. Okay, watershed is a very important concept. It's the land that contains the water that flows into the Colorado River. So all the tributary rivers that flow into the Colorado River are part of that watershed, okay? And as you can see, in the case of the Colorado River Basin, it consists of parts of 7 states in the west, and then a little bit of Mexico right there in the south. And so there are rivers all throughout the Colorado River Basin that have been depleted, that no longer flow the way they used to, where fish and other aquatic organisms are stressed and at risk. And then, of course, the delta, where you saw the photo a little while ago, the Colorado no longer makes it to the sea. It's no longer connecting to the sea. And rivers are supposed to reach the sea. So the lack of that connection affects not only the river and the delta where the river once was, but all of the estuarine species where the river and the sea meet. So it's a very stressed river basin, and we decided we would work here. It's an iconic river. It sculpted the Grand Canyon. I'm sure many of you have seen the Grand Canyon. So it's a very important river, but a very stressed river. And these little orange dots are areas where we've had projects, restoration projects, to return water to the environment in the Colorado River Basin. So let me show you a few of those. Some of you may have been to Steamboat Springs. It's a really fun tourist town to go to in the upper part of the Colorado River Basin. And there's a beautiful river that runs through there called the Yampa River. And back in the drought year of 2012, virtually all of you who are listening this morning, this afternoon, um, in the United States probably experienced that 2012 drought. It was very widespread throughout the country. The Mississippi River was flowing really low. The Colorado River Basin had been in drought already for years, and it was hit really hard by that 2012 drought. The Yampa River was about to crash. I'm going to show you it's a beautiful river, as you can see. But look at this chart. This is a little wonky maybe, but I'm going to put a little arrow here. Look at right there at the end of June in 2012, the river was so much lower than it's supposed to be. That dotted line shows the normal flow for the river in an average year, and that heavy filled in graph where the arrow is pointing down, that shows how the river actually looked in 2012. So it was flowing at only 5% of its normal flow. It was about to crash ecologically. There's a beautiful whitefish, a native whitefish population in that river that could have crashed that year. The river was so low. So we partnered up, changed the course, with an organization called the Colorado Water Trust. And we helped to purchase water from an irrigation area, from a water district that didn't need the water, that all of the water they had that particular summer. And so from that reservoir on the right, there's a big dam that stored that water, and we were able to release water for the river to bring the levels of the river up to a less dangerous place for the fish and all of the boating and fishing that happens in that river for the whole summer. And so it prevented that river from crashing ecologically. And you can see for a while the rafting had been shut down, the river was too low, fly fishing had been shut down, the river was too low, and it all came back. And so it benefited the local economy, right? Everybody was in the river again, boating, fishing, having a good time, and the fish were benefiting too. So it made the river, it helped the river to get through that serious drought. In the Verde River in Arizona, I'm sure some of you are from Arizona, maybe listening. This is a beautiful desert river that flows through the central part of Arizona. One of the healthiest rivers in the desert regions of the western United States. But there's an irrigation district that draws water from this river that had been depleting the river for about 5 or 8 miles every year when they wanted to irrigate their crops. The water would just get put into a ditch system and become completely dry for miles and miles. Again, not good for the fish, right? And so we worked again with a partner, the Nature Conservancy in Arizona, to work on upgrading the irrigation system. And this is a guy named Frank Gamenden, and he is what's called the ditch master on that ditch system. And we helped to support the installation of this gizmo you can see he's working at. It was basically a solar-powered automated head gate for their ditch, which allowed him to regulate the water that came out of that ditch system in a much better way than he ever could before. He can do it on his cell phone from his living room instead of having to come out and physically lift that gate that you can see there. And the water that's flowing one way is going to the river here, and the water that's on the other side of him is going into the ditch system. So instead of all the water coming out of the river into the ditch, just a bit of it is now. So the farmers get the water they need, and the river gets the rest. Very simple idea, but it wasn't happening that way. So for more than 100 years, that river was running dry for much of the year, and now it has water. So the fish are better off, the birds are better off, the people who want to come down and boat and enjoy the river and go birding are all better off. So again, it's a healthier river, healthier economy, and we were so happy to work on that project and help make that happen. This is one of the big water stories of our century so far, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. You may have read about it in the newspaper a year or two ago. The Colorado River Delta used to be one of the world's fabulous freshwater desert ecosystems. Today it looks like this. It's completely dried out. There's no water in it. For about 90 miles, the Colorado River runs dry before reaching the sea. So the delta, which used to be a couple million acres of fabulously beautiful wetlands is now dried up. It's incredible to go there and see it. But, and this is an amazing thing, the United States and Mexico got together and decided in 2012, late 2012, to sign an agreement that says we, the United States and Mexico, are going to work together to give some water back to the Delta. And this was amazing because, as you know, the West has been in drought for many years now. California and Colorado, and the Colorado Basin, all of those states kind of tight on water. So to agree to do this was really unique. Internationally, this was an international story because nowhere had two countries come together and decided to give a river in such great need of water some water back, even though their own demands for water were very high. So this was a very, very important, sort of groundbreaking effort on the part of these two countries. And I have to say, the conservation organizations that worked here on this project deserve lots of the credit because they figured out how to make this happen, how to get the two countries to be able to agree to give some water back to the Delta. This story has been very interesting. I went down to the Delta when this is the spring of 2014, so nearly 2 years ago now. It happened in this photo is from March 23rd, 2014. And what you're looking at is the last dam on the Colorado River. Okay, the Colorado River has lots of dams. We saw Hoover Dam earlier. This is the very last one, and it's very close to the border of the US and Mexico, on the Mexican side. And what happened was the gates of this dam were lifted up on that Sunday morning, and the river, for the first time in many, many years, began to flow through the Delta. So what you're looking at is the gates are open, the water is beginning to flow into that dry, what had been that dry Delta for the first time in many years. It was an astonishing moment. And I'm going to show you some photos. This is the upper part of the Colorado River. Within days, we were able to get in canoes and canoe this part of the river. This is the not too far downstream from that dam, and that's me in the first canoe there coming into the camera. And the fellow in the back is also a National Geographic explorer who's an expert in the ecology of the Delta and an expert in birds. He was identifying, I think that morning we were out, maybe in 2 hours he identified more than 40 birds by sound or by sight that were coming back to the river system. It's an amazing experience. Every morning we went out to find the leading edge of the river. So picture this, you've got 90 miles of dry channel. The gates were opened, the river's coming down. So every morning we would go out and try to find where's the river going to be this morning? Where is the water going to have arrived? And this is an image of the river having just arrived in this place. You can see there's not a lot of water there, but very shortly there'll be very much water there. Okay, that's me in the blue shirt taking notes. Some of the other conservationists were there. There were dozens and dozens of scientists, biologists, hydrologists that were down in the Delta during this experiment to monitor what's going on. Where's the water going to go? How far along its banks is it going to replenish the floodplain and things like that? So it was an incredibly exciting time. Here's a before and after shot that we took. This was the river on the left, the river channel before the river arrived. And then a few days later, the river had arrived. You almost felt like you could bring a picnic, right, and have dinner along the banks. It was so beautiful after the river had gotten there. These are kids from a town called San Luis Rio Colorado. And these kids had never seen the river that had given their town part of its name. They had never seen the Colorado River, even though their town is named after it. You can see it. The river flows through their town, but for their entire lives, that channel had been dry. So there was a huge kind of a welcoming party for the river in this little town of San Luis Rio Colorado. These kids were playing in the river, people were boating, We came back on a Sunday afternoon, and there were hundreds and hundreds of people with barbecues and, you know, balloons and playing, dogs running around, people swimming, music. It was just an amazing experience, that kind of a social experience of people welcoming their river home. It was one of the most incredible things I've ever seen. About 8 weeks later, so remember, the gates were lifted on March 23rd. About, I think it was May 14th, a little bit of the river made it all the way to the sea. So you can see right here, the river, a small amount of the river is connecting to the sea. And this was a very historic moment to have, you know, two countries work together to help a river achieve its destiny, right? If a river has a destiny, it's to reach the sea. The Colorado historically flowed to the sea, and it hadn't been doing that for a long time. So here it is reaching the sea. So it was a very sort of emotional moment, historic moment. A lot of newspapers and science articles were written about this experiment. And now the scientists are trying to do the work to understand what happened during this time. How much vegetation was restored? Did the willows come back? Did the cottonwoods come back? What's happening to the bird population? So there's a lot of really interesting science that's happening right now to see what the benefits of this experiment were. And the U.S. and Mexico, this was a 5-year experiment, still going on. And the U.S. and Mexico are negotiating right now to determine whether to continue this restoration. And I think we're optimistic that they will continue this restoration going forward. And what's happening right now are what we call base flows that are going to the new habitats that have been created, either by that flood flow that I was just describing, or by the trees that have been planted, actively planted by the conservation organizations. And Change the Course is helping to provide these base flows to sustain habitats like this one. This is called Laguna Grande, and it's a beautiful, again, planted. These are cottonwoods and willow trees native to the region, mesquite, that are bringing back the habitats and the birds. Remember, maybe I didn't say this, the Colorado Delta is a very important place on the Pacific Flyway. Hundreds of thousands of migratory birds pass through this area every year, and they've had nowhere to rest and stop and feed and breed because there's been no habitat for them. And so we're beginning to recreate these habitats. You can think of them as like stepping stones, habitats like this where they can stop and feed and rest and then go to another one as they work their way up the flyway. And so it's beginning to, again, nothing like the Delta used to be. That would take way too much water than we can give it, but at least some habitat is coming back. And the important lesson for me has been how resilient nature is. You know, if we add water to an environment like this that has been dry for a really long time, it comes back. We can bring it back if we put our minds to it. So it's a very, to me, very inspiring story. So just to wrap up before we get to your questions, we also communicate with our, we call it our pledge community. Everyone who's made that pledge to join Change the Course, we communicate once or twice a month to keep everybody sort of engaged in thinking about water. Based on our conversation together this morning, or my talk this morning, you'll probably know the answer to that little quiz question we put out a few months ago. How many gallons of water does it take to make a cotton shirt? You know, right? The answer is C. So we'll communicate with little quiz questions like this. We'll give you updates on our projects so that you can see how your pledge is being put to work out in the field, and things like that. So it's a way to sort of keep this movement growing and keep people sort of staying engaged in what's happening in the world of water. And here's where we are now. We are, as I say, building a movement of water stewardship. We have 170,000 people in our pledge community at this point, a little more than that. 22 businesses and corporations have joined with us as partners and sponsors. We've accomplished 16 projects with many more coming in the pipeline. And we've restored more than 4 billion gallons of water to depleted rivers and wetlands. That sounds like a lot of water, a billion, 4 billion is a big number, but it's not really a lot of water. We have a long way to go, but it has made a difference in the Yampa River, in the Verde River, in the Delta, in all the rivers we've worked in. Those billions of gallons have made a difference. It's a drop in the bucket of what we need to do, but we're off to a really, really good start. So that's a snapshot of Change the Course. I think what I'd love to do now, if Deb is there and can start a little video, it's 1 minute video that gives you a feel for Change the Course. And by the way, there's a place that tells you here to make a pledge, get out your phone and text. Don't feel that you have to do that. And especially if you're under 14 years of age, please don't text, okay? If you're over 14, I think it's okay to go ahead and text if you want to, but the purpose here is just to learn about Change the Course. And you can go and text with your family if you're under 14. When we're finished this morning, if you are older than 14, and it's okay to text now too if you're above the age of 14. But mostly, I just wanted you to get a feel for what Change the Course is. It's 1 minute long, and then we'll come back together and start to have a dialogue. Okay, I'll answer your questions. Okay, here we go. Thanks, Deb.
So get this, the Colorado River, the same river that carved the Grand Canyon, doesn't even make it to the sea anymore. And it's not just the Colorado. The Nile, the Ganges, the Rio Grande, lots of rivers, big and small, are so overtapped they're often reduced to just a trickle. How crazy is that? We're sucking an entire river dry. Practically everything we do uses water. Like, did you know that it can take 330 gallons of water to make one pizza? And your All-American blue jeans, 2,900 gallons, or just one pair. The good news is we can blue jeans, 2,900 gallons, or just one pair. The good news is we can fix this, and you can start right now. Grab your phone and pledge to conserve water by texting RIVER to 77177. In return, Change the Course will restore 1,000 gallons of water to depleted rivers and wetlands. Together, we can change the course.
Okay, thank you for listening to that. So did everybody see that video? Okay, so I think we'll move on to questions, okay? So who has questions? I think if I'll be able to see your questions if I understand this right, and I'm happy to respond to anyone's questions. So feel free to send them in. I might put some glasses on so I can see. Let's see, do we have any questions coming in? Maybe I'm not seeing them. Okay, I see somebody says that their city has a river restoration project, which is great. So thank you if you're participating in that. That's one of the great things about water, is that water's in our backyard. We all live in a watershed, so we can all participate. So here's a question. If we don't do anything about conserving water, what could happen? Ooh, that's a good question. If we don't do anything about conserving water, more and more rivers are going to run dry, right? There's a finite supply, and our populations are growing. Everybody needs water to drink and to eat. So without conservation, we're going to have to build more dams, right? Which is going to affect more fish and send more species to extinction. To the extent we can use water more efficiently and conserve water, that allows us to help keep rivers healthier, right? So it's that kind of balance that we're looking for. We can meet our needs by using water more wisely and leave some for nature. So without conserving, more lakes will run dry, more rivers will run dry, more fish and birds won't have their habitats, okay? My goodness, how much water does the world population use each week? I'd have to get out my calculator. Let's see. Let me hang on to that question because I might have to grab my calculator, and I don't think of it as a weekly thing. But let me give you this information though. If you're an average American, okay, if you're an average American, your water footprint, which includes your diet and your energy use and all of your material things that you buy, as well as your use of water at home, is about 2,000 gallons a day, okay? Which means it would be about, what, 14,000 gallons a week. Is that right? Yeah, 2 times 7, 14. So about 14,000 gallons a week for your personal water footprint. Now, the water that you use at home is only about, if you're an average American, about 100 gallons a day at home. And that's important because that's the water that's coming from your local reservoir or your local river, right? So even though your use of water at home is much smaller than, say, your diet, the water that it takes to make your diet, it's important to conserve water at home too. It's important to, turn off the tap while you're brushing your teeth, to be thinking about how much water it takes to water the lawn and how long of a shower you take. All of it's important. It gets us thinking about water. It's important to know the source of your water. When you turn on a tap, right, water comes out. It's one of the great blessings of our country. We don't have to worry about water being there. Turn on the tap and there it is. And remember, for nearly 1 billion people around the world, that doesn't happen. They don't have a tap to turn on where their water comes out. So we take it for granted. It's so easy to take for granted. We do it all the time, turning on that tap and there it is. But that's the work of a lot of engineers and a lot of people that put their lives into making our water supply available and safe to drink, right? And so it's important to use that water carefully and to be grateful about it and to recognize, well, where is that water really coming from? When I turn on the tap, is it coming from the groundwater? Is it coming from a lake? So know the source of your water. Is it coming from a river that flows nearby? Kind of connects you to the environment, right? If you know that the water you're drinking is coming from this place. Not a lot of people know the source of their water, so it'd be really a good exercise to just become familiar with your particular source of water and what's going on with it. Okay, let's see. And maybe I'm talking too long. Let's see. How many gallons of water do you waste when you leave the water on while you're brushing your teeth? Okay, so let me grab my calculator. If you have a typical faucet, it's about 2.5 gallons a minute. So let's just say you brush your teeth for a minute. I'm not sure how long we typically brush our teeth, but let's just say we brush our teeth for a minute and the faucet is running. Obviously, if it's putting out 2.5 gallons a minute, that's going to waste 2.5 gallons just by letting that water run while you're brushing your teeth. So just by turning the tap off, you can save 2.5 gallons of water, okay? So that's a pretty easy thing to do. And I think most of us probably do that, but some people still don't, because water just seems so endless. So that's a really great question. Here's another one. Is it possible to turn salt water into fresh water? Oh, that's a great question. Yes, it is possible to turn salt water into fresh water. And that's a process called desalination, desalting, desalination. And that's basically taking the salt out of ocean water, or what we call brackish water, which is slightly salty water. So by removing the salt, we make that water clean enough to drink. The problem is that process is usually it takes a lot of energy, okay? The typical process is to have what we call a membrane and to push the salt water through the membrane. And in doing that, it leaves the salts behind and creates fresh water on the other side of the membrane. But it takes a lot of energy to push that water through the membrane. And so to create that drinking water, we have an energy cost. And as we've just been learning, an energy cost is also a water cost, right? And so again, conservation, using water more efficiently, whether it's in a city or on a farm, is usually the most, the cheapest and the best environmentally good way to meet that water need, right? We're building desalination plants in some parts of the world because there's very little alternative. If you're in Saudi Arabia, in the deserts of the Persian Gulf area, there's not a lot of rain. There's no rivers. There might be groundwater, but you're going to deplete that. So they have turned to desalination in a major way to create their drinking water. And in effect, they're turning oil into water, using their energy resources to make drinking water. But in this country, most of the time, we don't need desalination if we get smarter and wiser and more conserving of the water that we have. Okay, so it is possible, but let's look at conservation first. Is my sense of it. Okay, here's a question from Elgin High. How long do you think we'll still have fresh water until it runs out? Well, as we see in these photos, right, we're running out of water in a lot of places already. Rivers are running dry that normally should have water in them. So in some places, we've already reached that point, right? If you're in the lower Colorado, if you're a little town in that delta, you've already run out of water. And you're getting water from, to drink, but maybe don't have water in your river. So some places have already run out. Globally, we're likely to not run out of water because water is very local, right? It's not the same for everyone. If you're living in, New England, you're not going to run out of water the way you might if you live in the delta of the Colorado River. There's much more water in New England than there is in the desert Southwest. Okay, so it depends on where we are. But globally, we do have to worry about this because we trade all these goods and services, right? Most of us have food that's coming from thousands of miles away on our plate. So the grapes, the fruits, the lettuce, the corn, it's coming from all over the place, not only in this country, but from around the world. So in a way, we're all connected to each other through water because our food products and our cell phones and everything is made all over the world. So our water footprint lands to some extent in China. We're all over the place in terms of where the products are made that we're using. So it connects everybody. It's a really important question. Thank you. Let's see. Here's another one from Elgin High. You mentioned for every pledge you would put water back in rivers. Where is this water coming from? Excellent question. So it comes from different places. In the example of, say, the Verde River in Arizona, that water was there all the time, but it was being taken out of the river for irrigation, right? Some of that water would eventually get back to the river, flowing underground and meet up with the river miles downstream, but the river was dry for that 5 to 8 miles. So by installing that head gate on the canal that could be monitored and regulated, it allowed the river to keep some water. No farmers were without water. They got all the water they needed, but the river got water too. And all it took was putting in that infrastructure, right? That gate to open and close the river at the right time. And that required somebody to fund it and install it and understand how the river system works. So it was a great example, I think, of how we can get smarter about how we use water. Nobody lost water, the river gained water. And that really helped everybody, right? So those examples are really important. We're not talking about taking water away, just getting smarter about how we use it. Okay, so here's another question. How do we purify water that we have already used? Very good question. And there are many ways to do this. Water is always flowing, and this is an interesting thing about water. If you live in Illinois, some of you do, of course, Elgin High is in Illinois. If you're in Illinois, you're in what's called the Mississippi River Basin. You may not be on the Mississippi, but you're on a tributary to it. There are rivers running through, whether it's the Illinois River or another river that joins the Mississippi and flows down to the sea. So water is always flowing downhill. It's always flowing down gradient. So in some sense, we're always drinking someone else's water, because water is always flowing downhill. And so it's very important that we treat water before we drink it. And we treat water enough that it's going to meet the needs that we have for that water. So if we're taking water out of a river, usually it goes through a treatment plant before it comes to our homes and we drink it. So water might come out of your local river or reservoir, and it goes to a treatment plant and takes out all the things that wouldn't be healthy for us to drink. And then it comes to our homes through piping systems, right? And so that treatment plant makes that water safe to drink. And our governments regulate all of that water to make sure that the water is up to standards, okay, that it's safe for us to drink. And that's very important for our health. I mean, we drink that water every day. And so that's one way that we purify water, is in those treatment plants. But nature also purifies water. You know, if you run water through a wetland, this may not be obvious, but if you run water through a wetland, the wetland itself, the plants in the wetland, can take out some of those pollution, some of those pollutants, and make that water cleaner. It might still have to go through a treatment plant, but it won't need as much treatment as it did if it hadn't gone through the wetland. And going through wetlands makes that water also cleaner for rivers downstream. So that's really important too. Great questions, by the way. Okay, let's see. What is your view on bottled water? Well, I'm not a fan of bottled water, and here's why. Most of the water that comes out of our tap is clean and safe to drink, okay? I much prefer, and this is what I do, if I'm going to go off on a hike or I'm going to go play tennis, which I do, if I'm going out for the day or I'm going to be going off on a trip, I take my own bottle. I don't have one on my desk here, but I take my own bottle and fill it with water from the tap, and I drink that. Because bottled water, one, it's expensive, right? It costs some money to purchase bottled water, whereas if you fill your bottle from your tap, pennies, right? As opposed to the cost of a plastic bottle of water. The other thing is that it's in plastic, okay, and it takes water to make that plastic. And so you're putting water in a plastic bottle that takes water to make, plus it creates pollution, right? Plastic it's so cheap now that we don't think much about it. And I don't know about you, but I see plastic bottles thrown everywhere. So it creates a lot of litter. It creates a lot of plastic pollution. Even if it goes into a landfill, it can last a long time. And those plastic little pieces sometimes get back into the ocean and can cause harm to ocean life. So it seems like a very simple thing to just, put water, buy bottled water. And granted, bottled water is probably better for our health to drink than soda in a bottle. So in that sense, it's not so bad. But if we have a choice, I think tap water, as long as we know it's safe, to put that in our own bottle and drink that. That's what I do. So that's just my thought on that. Let's see. Here we have a question about water filters. That's a very good question. Many people at home decide to put filters on their faucets before the water comes out to drink. And people do that because they want to take additional substances out of the water before they drink it or use it for cooking or whatever. And that really depends on whether it's necessary or not. I think really depends on your local water system. And your water utility, the agency or organization that supplies your drinking water can tell you what's in your water. And you can decide whether or not you want to put a filter on your water. In my house, we get water from underground. I live on a small ranch actually, and so our water comes from a well, and we don't put a filter on that water. Depending on where you live and where the source of your water is, you might want to have a filter on your water. And again, your water utility can give you information on that, on what's in your water, and then you can make a decision about whether a filter would be a good thing or not for your particular home. let's see. I think I missed a few as I was going along here. Let me see. So I'm just going to go back up here. There's a question from Elgin High. Do you think there will be fresh water in the next 150 to 200 years? Absolutely. No question about it. This is the beautiful thing about what we call the water cycle, that water cycles, and it cycles in a finite amount, but what we call the water cycle is one of the most beautiful cycles in nature, and it's very unique to the earth. I I could go on and on about the water cycle. I realize we're at 11 o'clock, but it is a fabulous system, and it's worth looking at a diagram of the water cycle in your class and look at how the vegetation on the land plays an important part in the water cycle. I'm actually writing a book right now that talks a lot about how we cycle water and how we've interrupted that cycle and how we can get that cycle working better again. But it's renewed, right? Water evaporates, it forms clouds, comes back as rain, and it goes through our forests and through our wetlands. And how we manage the land has a lot to do with the quality of our water. And so that's maybe a good place to end today. I realize it's 11 o'clock and you all have to go. But thank you so much. This has been a wonderful experience for me. I hope it's been good for you. And best of luck to all of you.